Why the Israeli Palestinian conflict considered as the world's most intractable conflict? News coming in about rising tension between Israel and Gaza and innocent people dying has shocked the world. What is the history of this conflict that has consumed the lives of thousands of people? And where did it all start? It's a common perception among people around the world that Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been going on for centuries, mostly due to religion. But that's not true. It's something simpler than that, something that human civilizations have often fought for: land. Up until early 20th century, the area of Israel-Palestine as we know today was under the Ottoman Empire. Though at that time, majority of the area was inhabited by Arab Muslims, Christians, and really a small number of Jews, and they were all living in peace. This started with the rising movement of Zionism, a political movement aimed around the ideology of a Jewish state. A state centered around their historic Holy Land, a place where their ancestors were religiously persecuted from for centuries. As more and more Jews joined the movement, they believed that Judaism is not a religion, but rather a nationality, and it was the only way to protect themselves from religious persecutions. The period between 1900 to 1910 saw thousands of Jews migrating to this area from Western and Central Europe. With the collapse of Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, Britain took control of the area and it was called British Mandate for Palestine. Initially, British allowed Jewish immigration, but as more and more Jews started coming in, violent conflicts between local Arabs and Jews started rising. To ease the tension, by 1930s, British decided to limit Jewish immigration. This led to the formation of Jewish militia, with the aim of overthrowing the British and as well as fighting against the local Arabs. By the end of 1945, Holocaust had changed the world permanently. The atrocities done by Nazi Germany made most of the world support the idea of a Jewish state. Due to all these happenings and constant increase in violent conflicts between Jews and the Arabs, United Nations decided to divide the region of Palestine into two different regions: an independent state for Jews that came to be known as Israel, and one for Arabs known as Palestine. The city of Jerusalem was kept as an international zone, as it was an holy site for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. But this did not go well with the neighboring Arab countries, and they formed a military coalition and declared war on Israel. But by the end of the war, Israel was able to drive away Arab forces and were now well past their borders as defined by United Nations a couple of years ago. And the worst of all, a huge number of Palestinian people were removed from their homes, and this led to the mass exodus of Palestinians. These people were forced to live in refugee areas in neighboring countries. Descendants of many are still living in these refugee settlements. In 1967, another war broke out between neighboring Arab countries and Israel. This time, Israel was able to gain more territory and was now in control of all the Palestinian territories as defined in the UN plan. Israel was now governing over Palestinian people they had been fighting since early 1900s. Over the next few decades, tensions died down with other Arab countries, but Israel was still occupying the Palestinian areas of the West Bank and the Gaza. Meanwhile, in 1960s, Palestinian Liberation Organization (PLO) was formed. Its major focus was to liberate the Palestinians and fight back the Israelis. Both PLO and Israel fought for years from 1960s to early 1990s. And during this period, Israel-occupied Palestinian territories saw massive movement of Israelis into West Bank, Gaza, and even Jerusalem, facilitated by subsidies from the Israeli government, making it virtually impossible for Palestinians to ever have a separate state. As settlers moved in, to ensure their protection, soldiers followed. All this movement led to rise of another violent extremist group in Gaza during the late 1980s known as Hamas. But it's not like both Israel and PLO didn't try to achieve peace in the region. After violent protests from 1987 to 1993, the First Intifada, both PLO and Israeli government tried to negotiate peace through Oslo Accords, an initiative to try to coexist with each other. But the extremist groups on both sides opposed the accords and ensured peace is never achieved in the area. Right-wing Israeli assassinated the prime minister for it, and violent extremist group Hamas launched suicide bombing to obstruct these peace initiatives. And as desired by these groups, peace was never achieved, and another set of violent protests in Palestine areas erupted, the Second Intifada. These protests killed more people on both sides than the First Intifada. When protests finally ended in 2005, Israeli forces disengaged from Gaza. Hamas came into power and separated itself from Palestinian Authority in West Bank. Israel's right-wing politics shifted the focus from trying to look for peace to trying to control any future violence. They built huge walls in West Bank to restrict Palestinian movement. This is the situation right now, with violent extremist groups in Gaza, oppressed Palestinian population in West Bank, and Israel in the middle. It is too unstable, and these attacks are a result of that. We could only hope that someday we will discuss how this conflict got resolved and investigate its key moment for our information. If you're a curious soul like me, subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, hit the like button.